This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. We're back with another episode of Art of Darkness, a podcast about the dark side of creativity. I'm Kevin Kautzman, joined by the Detroit Lion himself, the showman, the man who's ready to do it live in Detroit, Michigan next Saturday, Brad Kelly. Brad, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I was informed that the Lions are playing the Vikings today as we're recording this. So this is, apparently this is an important game. So
it's a big, listen, the Vikings are a team there's a big team. They're a team to beat this year. Yeah. And the Longhorns went down in flames last evening to Georgia. I need something to surge my dopamine back up. But I'm sure, listen, I'm sure Art of Darkness, I'm recording the game. That's what I'm saying. And these are the lengths that we go to on Art of Darkness to bring you these episodes. Football Sunday. In the afternoon. And the reason we're doing it in the afternoon is because we have the great Abbie Lucas with us, whom you'll remember from the Bolaño episode. And we have a core episode for you, and we'll get into it. But Abbie, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. This afternoon, I am missing the last day of the London Film Festival, which I guess is like my sports ball.
Oh my gosh.
This is what, again, we suffer, we labor for you, the audience. How is the film? And of course, we are doing the life of the great master of cinema and suspense, Alfred Hitchcock. And of course, it makes sense to have a filmmaker like our friend Abbie on the show to do this. How's the film festival been, Abbie? Let's start there. What's going on?
The film festival has been great. There's a pretty like good mix of kind of like smaller foreign independent films and like bigger films that you'll see during the award season next year. I've seen it's been the full spectrum. I've seen some really great films. I've seen some not so great films. But most of the ones I went to see were the foreign language ones, because the other ones are going to come out in a bigger space later. So,
Can you name a standout film that people maybe want to check out?
One of the ones that I really liked was a Brazilian film called I'm Still Here, which was set during the Pinochet regime. And it's kind of like a portrait of a family of a former congressman who gets disappeared at some point. A few people have said that like as a historical document, it's not super interesting, but like the performances and the family aspect of it are like quite striking, I think. That was a great one. And then another one that I saw that was also based on real life was called Marco the Invented Truth, which was about a Spanish guy who claimed to have been one of the deportees that ended up in a concentration camp during World War II. And it turns out the whole thing was completely fabricated, and he's just this like giant narcissist who likes giving speeches. And that was based on a true story. It was just a wild story to see as a film. Really cool though.
Is that a documentary or a feature?
That's a feature. That was a fictionalized real story. Yeah.
Fascinating. Oh, cool. All right, you heard it from Abbie. That Pinochet business, Brad, you went on Rare Candy recently and we put it on behind our paywall too. The Gain of Fiction with Glenn on By Night in Chile.
Yeah, right. The Bolaño novel, and Pinochet is a character in By Night in Chile. So Yeah, it's interesting time period. I'll have to check that film out for sure.
Cool. It's all coming together. Okay, so getting into Hitchcock, we got a monster outline for you here. I have no idea how far we're going to take this, how many hours we're going to go, but I know Abby's buckled in for the ride. You can't see it behind me, but I'm in my basement studio. I've got my Japanese screen here behind me for those who are watching on YouTube, and then in the theater of the mind everywhere else. You can't see it, but there's a shower right back there. And there may or may not be a dead woman. You don't know.
Yeah, let's hope not.
You're never gonna find. You're never gonna know. They're never going to know.
The suspense is killing me.
All right. So of course we're doing the great Alfred Hitchcock, and I couldn't be more excited about this. Let's start with the question, the classic Art of Darkness question. I guess last bit of housekeeping is you got 1 week to get your tickets for the Detroit show. It is on October 26th, Hamtramck, Michigan, at Planet Ant, and tickets are selling fast, and we'd love to see you there. If you're going to be coming in from out of town, or even if you're just in town, you want to hang out, reach out to us. We're going to be there. It's a costume party. Costumes are optional, but strongly encouraged. Going to be a lot of fun. And we are
don't make Kevin and I be the only people in costumes. We need like one or two other costumes in the audience. At least.
Yeah. Dude, come to my dance cycle.
Right. Please come. It's gonna be
please come. It's gonna be good. And it's the death of Harry Houdini. So gonna be a good time. We did one of these live shows in St. Paul. Now we are doing one on Brad's turf in Detroit, and then I think again next year we'll do another one in St. Paul, and then maybe somewhere else. But for now, Twin Cities and Detroit, it's kind of home turf, so that's where we stay. But it's gonna be a good time, and so please try to get out. All right, Brad, what do you know about Alfred Hitchcock?
Yeah, I got thinking about this as I knew we were doing this today, and I was like, oh, what do I know about Alfred Hitchcock? And really, biographically, I know almost nothing. I mean, I know he's an Englishman. I've seen a lot of his films. I know that the movies, the best of the movies, are literally the best of cinema. Hugely influential. Long career. I couldn't guess how many movies, but it's got to be dozens. But as a person, I realized I don't know hardly anything about him at all. I know he came to America and started working in Hollywood at some point. Other than that, I honestly couldn't say. So I'm really interested to find out more.
Isn't that wild? And there has been, there was that kind of biopic, and they focused on the obsession, and there was that play, Hitchcock Blonde, which was that. Did they adapt that play into the movie, Abby?
I'm not entirely sure. I actually haven't seen the HBO movie about his sort of relationship or obsession with Tippi Hedren. So yeah, I don't know about that. Probably. Yeah. I mean, we're good. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, and making movies about movies about a movie maker, film about it, it's always going to be an attraction. And just like Brad says, though, there's an enigma to him somehow. He's sort of like he's a pop culture figure that you almost seem to know nothing about, except that he was obsessed and he had a thing for blondes, I guess, which, I mean, okay, who can blame a man? He just like me for real. So this is going to be good. We're going to learn a lot about Hitchcock and his work. And of course, Abby is a filmmaker herself. She's at Abbie Lucas, Abbie Lucas, like George, no relation, if you want to find her and get to know her work a little bit. I just think let's get into it. Before we do, I want to tease what we have for the After Dark. So on every episode we do of Art of Darkness, whether it's a dark room, a core episode, whatever, we do bonus material for patrons on Patreon, Substack, patreon.com/artofdarkpod, substack.com/@artofdarkpod. Same exact feed. Whether you subscribe to one or the other, it's the same difference. And so I've got a monster After Dark prepared. I'm going to be doing like a mini biography of Robert Bloch. the author of the novel Psycho. Brad, we've talked about Robert Bloch before on the pod, haven't we?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, he's sort of, at least I think he was in the Lovecraft circle, and I know he published stuff in Weird Tales. So yeah,
yeah, he was a protege of Lovecraft. So yes, and then so we'll do like a 2 or 3 page like mini biography with a focus on Hitchcock for Robert Bloch. I have a little bit more about Hitchcock's final days. I've got a bit about Hitch's weird gift to Melanie Griffith. He gave her a weird gift. There was a lot of like reassessment of Hitchcock after the fact, the way he treated women. They were like, this guy was weird. And I sort of go, the guy who made Vertigo and Psycho and the Birds made you uncomfortable. Little off. No. Right. We're going to talk a little bit about the what is the Hitchcock blonde, and then we have some business about the Hays Code. And in the outline, did you throw that in there, Abby? The bit about the Hays Code?
Yeah.
Okay.
As I was rewatching some of the films, I didn't really know a lot about the Hays Code until earlier this year, actually. And as I was rewatching some of the films in preparation for this, I was like, wow, this really factors into what he's doing, and he does a lot to try to subvert it in many ways, which is really interesting.
Yeah, so let's save that business for the After Dark for patrons. We've got a lot for the main episode here, and that'll be your little bit of business for the After Dark too. Okay, I think that's it. I have to talk about source material real quick. Abby, for your research, did you lean on a book or did you principally do online research?
I principally did online research. It was a mix of different like opinion pieces and trivia and that type of thing.
Yeah, cool.
And then I have my own analysis of the films as well.
Yes. Okay. All right. Very good. We are middle-aged people. We should have, at some point, it falls to us to be authoritative, doesn't it?
Well, that's true. Yeah.
I think our generation is going to suffer from permanent imposter syndrome because the boomers cast such a long shadow. But it really is our time to start saying what we think. Which, after 1,000 hours of podcasting, maybe that's not our problem. So I've got Donald Spotto, The Dark Side of Genius. Okay, that was an obvious biography to acquire for the podcast about the dark side of creativity. And then I have Hitchcock on Hitchcock, and this is Hitch's various interviews and writings. He was very clever, obviously a very, very clever man, and very English, despite Catholicism, the one true faith. We'll get into it. All right. So let's do the bio. And I'm gonna rattle on here for a bit. We will, get Abby in here, and Abby, if you have anything to interject at any point, just jump in. All right, so Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, really was. He revolutionized cinema with psychological thrillers, dark wit, and innovative techniques. His career spanned over 6 decades. And it gave rise to some of the most iconic films in history, which we're going to go into. We have a chunk of like the bangers, the ones that everybody's like, holy moly. Like, this transcends genre. This is pure Kino, as good as it gets. Vertigo. It was there briefly unseated Citizen Kane. People were saying this is the greatest. This is probably the greatest film ever made. And of course, those lists, it's all like, okay, apples, oranges, pears, whatever. But Vertigo is unrelentingly good. You watch Vertigo and you go, what is this? So of course, it's tricky with someone like Hitchcock too, because you kind of almost doing a podcast like this, you almost want to assume that everybody knows, but people don't know. And there's a new generation of people, they don't know why Psycho is so important. So we'll start with basics here. He did Psycho, Vertigo, Rear Window, North by Northwest, The Birds, and Rope. And that's not necessarily in order. I want to talk about Rope. Rope is like kind of a sleeper. I believe it's based on a play. I love Rope. Brad, do you know that movie? Do you know Rope?
Yeah, I know. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but yeah, it's great. Yeah.
And it has that awesome business of the power dynamic between the professor and his students. Rope is very today. Rope never, yeah, it's really good. And then, of course, he had a life behind the camera, and he was complicated, and he had fears and insecurities and obsessions and maybe a foot fetish. And, yeah. He had a strict Catholic upbringing and an insatiable desire for control over his films and those in them. And this has been the go-to subject for these biopics and these pieces of material, talking about that obsession that went behind that happened behind the camera, particularly with Tippi Hedren. Okay. So let's get into the early life. So we have a lonely childhood in London, and this would echo kind of through to the end of his life, this feeling of loneliness. So Alfred Joseph Hitchcock was born on August 13th, 1899. Think of that. 1899, and then the guy goes on and he makes Psycho and lives to the 80s, or to roughly. Crazy. Just crazy to think. In the modest London suburb of Leytonstone. How'd I do, Abby?
Leytonstone is how we would say it.
Leytonstone. Yeah. There we go. That's why you're here.
If you go to Leytonstone today, inside the tube station is a giant mural of just like all of Alfred Hitchcock's like film motifs and like the very like iconic silhouette, that kind of looks like a coin head in a way of his face. And Leytonstone today is only just now becoming a suburb that's like going through the gentrification process. So I can't even imagine what it would have been like in 1899.
It looks like it's sort of in the northeast.
It's in the east. Yeah.
It's in the east. Okay. Yeah. And East London historically, if you'd say working class. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely working class. It's where all the plague victims got buried. And that's like that's in Shoreditch, which is like now very central London, like right next to the city of London. So yeah, Leytonstone was like is quite a bit further out. It's probably like zone 3, I would say. Yeah, so it wouldn't have really felt like a city suburb at that time.
So it'd be like an exurb for now. I mean, in the vortex of London, and of course, I knew Leytonstone. Okay, all right, but so it's gentrifying now. So if you're visiting London, maybe go and get I don't know.
You can get some pretty good tacos out there. Some of the best tacos in London.
I was just gonna say, okay, tacos. All right, okay. So his and this is why we have Abby. One of the reasons. His upbringing in a lower middle class Catholic household overseen by his strict and devout parents, William and Emma Hitchcock, was far from easy or carefree. The youngest of 3 children, Alfred's life was shaped by rigid discipline, loneliness, and a strong sense of guilt that would later emerge as dominant themes in his films. I believe the mother's side had some Irish. So Hitchcock's father, William, was a greengrocer. And the family lived in an apartment above the shop. So we can sort of paint an image here, right? We're probably
it's like Margaret Thatcher.
Just like the Iron Maiden. Is that what you call her?
The Iron Lady.
The Iron Lady. But
Iron Maiden's a totally different thing.
We
call
her
different thing.
She was the Iron Maiden. Then she became the Iron Lady. All right, very good. I had forgotten about that, Abby. That's a very interesting point. Yeah, but Thatcher was not Catholic. No, quite probably to the contrary. In any case. They weren't wealthy, but they were stable, and young Alfred was sheltered from many of the harsher realities of life. Yet, despite this protection, Hitchcock's childhood was marked by a deep sense of isolation. Unlike many children who formed bonds through play and interaction, Alfred was often kept apart from his peers. His early years were filled with loneliness, something he attributed partly to his strict upbringing and his own physical appearance. It's another thing, too, his appearance, that silhouette of him, the sort of portly, doughy, rotund kind of
the pointy nose,
the face, and the severe. But I see a picture of him and I kind of smile though. I immediately have some sort of an affection. It's always kind of with a wink. And then the fact that he inserted himself into his films that way.
The cameos.
Little cameos, you know.
See, I always find that when he shows up in a film, I realize it's kind of comforting. There's like something about like, it's almost like a wink, like, by the way, this is just a movie. That's kind of how I always feel about it whenever he shows up and then he's gone, you know. It's eases the tension or something.
Apparently in one of his films, the Vertigo, it was, there was a point where Kim Novak had asked him a very serious question about her motivations in the film, and she was like, "We're just making a movie, Kim. It doesn't have to be so serious." Which
I love that.
Bizarre for a man who takes everything so seriously.
Right. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and in addition to it like being a movie, it's a Hitchcock movie.
Yeah.
He was like the ultimate auteur. Like, we're making movies. It's a Hitchcock movie. Boom. I mean, and we're gonna get to the point where he did this thing with Psycho, where if you showed late, you were not getting in. You're watching and it would be they would have like poster placards or whatever, and it'd be him on the poster. Like, I'm selling this movie. This is a Hitchcock joint, you know. So that kind of showman, but also like, and I don't use this word. I may have never used this word on the podcast, Brad. Droll.
Yeah,
we're droll maxing on the pod today.
Droll. Okay,
droll,
okay, yes,
not troll. Droll.
Yeah.
Droll.
Yeah, the definition is curious or unusual in a way that provokes dry amusement. His unique brand of droll self-mockery. Droll.
I would say
English.
Yeah.
Despite the Catholicism, or maybe because of it. So good stuff. And as an overweight child, Hitchcock was self-conscious, and his size made it. Well, he was the son of a grocery guy.
Well fed.
Let me just grab an apple here, and why not? I'm just going back. Yeah, he was self-conscious, and his size made him the target of teasing and bullying. And I have a strong suspicion that in East London, in before the war in Leytonstone, the bullying would probably get pretty hardcore. Yeah. He once reflected that he was always different from other children, largely because he was both physically and emotionally isolated. His parents' strict approach to discipline added to his sense of isolation. Now, Abby, did you, in your research, because we're going to come to a major inflection point early here, in your research, did you encounter anything about this famous story from his childhood? Anything?
No, I didn't.
No. Okay.
I didn't. This was a surprise to me. Which
So I'm gonna go into it. So the Hitchcocks believed in instilling a strong sense of right and wrong, often through harsh punishment. One story in particular became emblematic of his early life and his future as a filmmaker, who had become obsessed with the themes of guilt, authority, and punishment. Brad, for kicks, while I look this up, do you have any idea what they did to little Alfred? If you had to guess.
His parents?
Yeah.
Gosh. I mean, I'm sure he got some degree of corporal punishment, but beyond that, I couldn't possibly say. Yeah.
They did, when he was 6 years old, they did a scared straight thing to him.
Oh, God.
Okay, so I'm going to describe it. Of his parents in his childhood, he said almost nothing apart from a story that gave a neat explanation for his many films about a man unjustly accused of a crime. He told the anecdote once again that evening, and this is from 1979. He was receiving a major award, and we're going to come to that at the end of the episode here, but stick with me. But his speech was too slow and erratic for the editors to use anything but the afternoon version. He was drinking. In any case, here's what he said about this. When I was no more than 6 years of age, I did something that my father considered worthy of reprimand. He sent me to the local police station with a note The officer on duty read it and locked me in a jail cell for 5 minutes, saying, "This is what we do to naughty boys." I have ever since gone to any lengths to avoid arrest and confinement. To you young people, my message is stay out of jail. he's very avuncular.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I know, but don't do that to your 6-year-old. Terrible. So yeah, then going on, it's when he was about 5 years old, 5 or 6, his father decided to teach him a lesson. It's unclear what he did to deserve this.
Interesting that he didn't reveal that.
Right. I mean, you're living above your family's shop. There probably were all kinds of opportunities to transgress and to steal something or
probably shoplifting. A greengrocer is not going to be happy about having a kid who shoplifts, right?
That's true.
Yeah, that tracks. And of course, he's 5 or 6. He doesn't know any better, right? So we're gonna throw him in jail. And 5 minutes, but holy moly, I mean it must have been torturous. So I've got a little more about it here from the Spotto biography. Let me find it. I've got more about his childhood, really. So I want to get into all of that. And here's what he says. Ours was a Catholic family. And in England, you see, this in itself is an eccentricity. I had a strict religious upbringing. I don't think I can be labeled a Catholic artist, but it may be that one's early upbringing influences a man's life and guides his instinct. I am definitely not anti-religious. Perhaps I'm sometimes neglectful. Hang on, I got a little tickle in my throat here. It's so unusual for me. In any case, the emotional alchemy of early influence and adult neglect would not only mark his work, but also the major pains and problems of his declining years. And then it goes on a little bit about his childhood. Life at 517 The High Road. That's their address. 517 The High Road.
The High Road.
Leytonstone. Literally, we're on the High Road.
Yeah.
Like Brad, that would be
above a shop.
That would be like Brad Kelly, the Kelly family, 553 Main Street.
Right.
That's where we live. Was a quiet rhythm of work for the parents and relative solitude for the youngest child, whose older brother and sister already packed off to school and with whom he would never develop any relationship at all. His father worked long hours in the grocery, supervising 2 and sometimes 3 assistants, as well as the multiple daily deliveries. Some destined for retail sale to the people of Leytonstone, some sold wholesale and carted off to Covent Garden. Meager incomes and a bumper crop of potatoes in the early years. Oh, there's a lot about potatoes. They ate a lot of potatoes. At Hitchcock, people who knew Hitchcock, there was potatoes at every meal. He wasn't like, I got my money, I'm done with the potatoes. We're having the potatoes. I have a strong affection for potatoes. When I eat a potato...
Is that potentially the Irish mother?
Yeah, of course. Yes, of course, Abbie. Yes, and also just like poverty. Just like, or not poverty, but just like there's not a lot. You got to get those starches in, Abbie. Yeah.
Sticks to your ribs.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, here's what it's saying. I mean, like meager incomes and bumper crops of potatoes in the early years of the century made that food a staple for local tables as well as for the market deliveries. And the Hitchcocks, like many middle-class English families, depended on potatoes for a cheap, filling, and nutritious, if somewhat monotonous, diet. Everyone who ever dined with Alfred Hitchcock knew that, except when he was on an unusually rigorous diet. Potatoes accompanied every dinner. They were variously boiled, baked, double-baked, and in later years, when he suffered some dental problems, mashed. This is going to tell us a little bit about his parents here, okay? William Hitchcock Sr., according to his youngest son, was a typical Cockney merchant who insisted on discipline, order, and simplicity in life as in diet. Some idea of the strictness of Alfred's upbringing and the ambivalence of his feelings are confirmed by the prison cell story he told the press, colleagues, writers, and actors for decades. This was his go-to parlor trick story to explain his himself, right? If the account is true, then William Hitchcock had an oddly cruel streak, no matter the offense for which the child was to be corrected. It is possible that behind the story are Alfred's mother and her father, the shadow figure of the grandfather policeman. But about this one can do no more than guess. Throughout his life, Hitchcock insisted that the brief boyhood jailing scarred him for life with a terror of the police. And he pointed to the recurring motif in his work of the innocent man arrested and imprisoned as an attempt to exorcise the childhood trauma. You think immediately of Psycho. She makes this horrible mistake. And then the police trailer and, of course, the great irony in Psycho is that the best thing for her would be if the police had stopped her.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. But she falls into something even worse than the police, right? Maybe don't defund the police, defund the Bates Motel.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know.
Some of these creepy motels around.
Yeah, we need creepy motels.
Keep the highways going past the motels so that they they don't become creepy offshoot places.
Sure. Or just allocate a little more to mental health resources and spy on the taxidermists harder, something like that. A little more here. But Alfred Hitchcock was always a master of the red herring, and he told interviewers just what they wanted to hear. A neat psychological explanation connected to a facile anecdote to justify a frequent plot device. He may also have invented the story quite naturally, given his Cockney family background in a society that hated policemen. It must be said to my credit that I never wanted to be a policeman, he said in later years. So the imprisonment story is impossible to corroborate, impossible to negate, and it may have at its base a family incident involving some kind of punishment that, as a child, Hitchcock thought extreme and that his fantasy at once enlarged. But the anecdote certainly does tell what he felt about his father and the sting of memory that his childhood had inflicted. Okay. All right. So we do. Is it true? Is it false? We don't know. It's the one man told the story, and but it impacted him. And of this, he would say the sting was absolute. I can feel it now. And if you start looking for this in his cinema, it's everywhere. It's in North by Northwest, Psycho, and so forth. Even Rope. There's that tension the entire time. Are we going to jail? Is somebody going to jail? Somebody's going to jail. And it's a real fear, and anxiety in society, and rightly so. Is it? I feel like men fear prison more than women. What do you think, Abby? Do you?
I mean, yeah. Like, prison isn't something I really ever give much thought to. I did see a documentary the other day at the London Film Festival about a women's prison in London that shut down recently, and I think women end up in prison for different reasons.
I think that's it. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's just purely a numbers game, right? And of course, you're a good person who's done nothing wrong, Abby, so you have nothing to fear. All right.
I used to have prison nightmares all the time.
Really?
It's been a while since I had one. But I used to have them all the time. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, with reason, Yeah. Yeah. Some close calls in my younger days. So
yeah, you don't want to spend any time in jail or prison. Strongly want to avoid that. Just like Hitchcock said to the youth. All right.
He was right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So yeah, this early experience was compounded by a strict religious upbringing that he received from his devout Catholic parents. The Hitchcocks were committed to raising their children with a strong moral compass, often using religion as a tool for control and discipline. Hitchcock was educated at St. Ignatius College, a Jesuit school in London, 0 days without Jesuit tricks, where the teaching methods were harsh and corporal punishment was common. Way before Vatican II, way before any scandals had broken. And if you submit to the authority of the church is a totalizing force, apparently even in England here, where the teaching methods, were harsh and corporal punishment was common. The Jesuits believed in strict discipline, and Hitchcock was no stranger to physical punishment. There you are, Brett. The fear instilled in him during his time at St. Ignatius would stay with him for life, fueling his fascination with guilt Punishment and the darker side of human nature. The school was known for its strict adherence to Catholic doctrine, and young Alfred was taught to fear sin and the consequences of disobedience. I didn't know that he was raised Catholic until preparing this episode, and then upon finding out, it all made perfect sense. I really think there are two things about Hitchcock now that I think. One, only an Englishman could see America, or yes, I'm going to say this. Only an Englishman could see America and represent America the way that Hitchcock did with those mid-century films with Vertigo, Psycho. He has the eyes of an outsider, and he had this ability to show us America in a unique way. North by Northwest, the idea to use that whole thing is just this spanning voyage from the UN, in Manhattan, all the way out to Mount Rushmore. And it's such an unusual, almost a comic book vision of the United States that I feel like an outsider could get at. And then the second thing now is this sense of Catholic guilt and the maw of hell awaiting you if you sin without repentance. And they call that angst that he puts on screen suspense. And that's what he does really, really, really well. I think people misunderstand what we mean by Catholic guilt. Like, you're actually guilty. You're just having certain feelings about, you're just not a Crowleyan do what thou wilt person. You actually have a moral compass, and the whole point of the Catholic guilt is that you are bound to fail. You will fail, and then you will be guilty. And that's a signal telling you need to repent. You have to da-da-da. So in any case, you feel that. To me, I feel that very acutely when I watch Psycho. And you're looking at this woman and you're thinking, don't do it. Don't do it. And you're just, the entire first half of that film, turn back, go back. You can go back. And all this talk in her head, and she's imagining. I love that moment in Psycho where she's driving and she's imagining the conversation that's happening back in Phoenix, and kind of smirking. She's getting off on having fucked over the big, nasty kind of cattleman or oil man or whatever it is whose money she robbed, and Hitchcock understands it's not in a heat of the moment. It's not really about the money for her. It's about dignity. It's about getting back at that guy. It's about getting married. They need some money to get married. It's all there. The money's just incidental to what she really wants. And a lesser director just makes it about the money. That's not what it's about. All right. Okay. So his father's stern punishments and the Jesuit approach to discipline left him with a deeply ingrained sense of guilt-based. He later admitted that his childhood experiences had a lasting impact on his psychological development. I was terrified of everything as a child, he once said. Terrified of punishment, of being wrong, of being different. All right. And then, of course, this all tracks through all his films.
You can't... To make stuff that's scary, you kind of have to be scared, I guess, in a way, right? I mean, it's reflective of his particular artistic sensitivity.
Absolutely. Brad, and I'm going to do something here in the background, but when you were a child, do you remember your childhood fears? What was it like for Brad Kelly as a lad?
Questions.
What was I scared of?
Yeah, what were you scared of when you were a child? I'll volunteer mine too. I'm trying to do something here in the background real quick. But yeah, what were you?
I mean, I'm trying to think about it. When I was very young, I was sort of scared of the dark in the basement, as I think most children are. More so, I was also scared. I remember having a very particular fear and this would have been like first grade, kindergarten, that age. I didn't like my bedroom door to be closed at night because I was afraid that like the entire world outside of my room would just sort of vanish.
Just disappear?
Yeah, and I had like a vision in my head of like a weird, like empty field that basically the rest of the world would turn into like this empty field. So that scared me. Scared of my dad. Scared of that's kind of the big ones, I would say. Yeah.
I had a nightmare. My father passed away when I was very young, and so I got to know the cemetery way too well as a little boy, and I had a nightmare that I could only describe as a night terror, where I was hopping on grave to try to avoid falling into the ground.
Oh
my
because I mean, it was just terrible. I mean, it took me years to sort of recover from that, So
Sure.
yeah, we all have these things. Abby, I don't know. Do you want to volunteer? Did you have a childhood fear?
I was always scared of being told off, and I'm still scared of being told off at middle age. So
you're scared of like confrontation, like somebody coming to you and Abby, how dare you? Da da da. This is really helpful information for me as a collaborator.
Yeah, this is Kevin's just looking for our buttons. He's noting these down.
Scared of being told off. When I was very little, I went to kindergarten for one day and then refused to go back, and went from being like a very quiet, sort of mild-mannered child to just screaming my head off anytime my parents drove past the kindergarten or it looked like I was going to go there. And I don't know why. Because I was only like 3 years old or something. And so for a while, I had to go and live with my grandparents because both my parents needed to work, and I just refused to go to kindergarten.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Fascinating.
Ungovernable. Just
right.
But then I loved school, like when I was a little bit older. So I don't know what it was about kindergarten that terrified the hell out of me, but I threatened to blow the place up, apparently.
Nice.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And now you're working on Killdozer the musical with your friend.
Yeah.
I was 3-year-old Marvin Heemeyer.
There you are. Very good. 3-year-old female New Zealand Marvin Heemeyer. Like he's just like me for real. All right. Well, thank you both. I had to order something. I had to eat some coffee to get through this day, so I just did that. But thank you. Appreciate you both being willing to share that. Yeah, so I mean, his early years were also marked by a fascination with stories of crime and punishment. Even as a child, he showed an interest in the macabre, devouring penny dreadfuls and crime novels. We really should bring back the penny dreadful.
I like
50 cents on Amazon. Tales of dreadfulness. Droll tales of dreadfulness.
Probably we could just actually dig up some archive copies and just repackage them. So
start a publishing house. Yeah, I'm in publishing. Yeah. He was particularly drawn to stories that explored the darker side of human nature. One of us.
Yeah.
His imagination was filled with tales of criminals, detectives, and mysteries, and he began crafting his own stories at an early age. And of course, Leytonstone, that's not far from old Saucy Jack's territory. Right?
Oh, yeah. That's that side of town. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's where true crime began. That's where it kicked off. Like in many ways, the modern world is like the world of Jack the Ripper. Our media environment is still Jack the Ripper's media environment, and that happened in 1888. So not too many
too
years
long.
before.
Yeah,
right. So something to think about. And he started crafting his own stories when he was very young. Which, of course, I mean, he was a total filmmaker. He would work on the screenplay. He would work on everything. And one can imagine too this sort of restrictive Catholic upbringing, and then it's like you get your hands on a detective story or something about a murder, and the ladies of the night in East London and have gone missing, and da da da. So it's you can sort of feel that, kind of fun. And he was intellectually gifted, which I don't think is a surprise.
That's not a surprise.
The boys, this is for the fellas. This one, the boys are going to love, right? He developed an early fascination with trains
Okay. Yeah, there it is.
There it is. Well, and of course, one of the funniest moments in all of cinema is North by Northwest, and we'll get to the Hays Code later with Abby. But right before the consummation of the act, a train goes into it, or right after the train goes into the tunnel.
Pop the champagne bottle.
Right. Like, are we? It's like so on the nose. It is the nose, you know. Yeah, and I love this. He developed an early fascination with trains, a passion that stayed with him throughout his life. Trains represented freedom and escape, something he longed for in his lonely and disciplined world. He memorized the routes of the British railway system, often riding the trains in his mind, imagining the distant places they would take him. And of course, this is in the movies, right? You know, Strangers on a Train and North by Northwest.
There's a lot of trains on these movies. North by Northwest and I saw one early a 1930s Hitchcock film. I think of The Lady Vanishes. I saw it at this great theater here in town, and that was all on a train. So yeah, there's a lot of trains in Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm. Yep. As he grew older, his interest in storytelling expanded beyond trains and geography. He began to create intricate narratives in his mind, often weaving together themes of guilt, fear, and suspense. His early short stories, written while working at Henley's Telegraph and Cable Company, foreshadowed the dark psychological themes that would later define his films. You know, and thinking about his time working in the Telegraph Company, that would be like somebody going to work at some internet job. Right. It's like I'm in telecommunication, you know, it's like, I mean, I think it was Carnegie who was a telegraph operator, which put him at this nexus of information. And, you know, so I just think it's an interesting thing. Even like in his youth, he's working in communication. So there you go. Even in these early works, he displayed a keen understanding of human psychology and an ability to craft tension and suspense. The themes of guilt, punishment, and wrongful accusation that haunted his childhood became the base of his entire cinema, right? And like, he's an example where we can really take this early childhood business and extrapolate it through to the life and to the work. Let me get into the biography again here. We're going to move out of his childhood into his sort of young adulthood and his career in early British cinema. I've got something here. He's so interesting because he had like a full-blown career before he even landed in Hollywood. He'd been working, he like apprenticed and then was a journeyman filmmaker. This guy, like, of all the artists that we've covered, he's maybe the most of he's like one of the biggest examples of like, no, I am a film director professionally. That's what I do. I just happen to make 10 of the greatest films ever made because I made 50, 60 films.
It was something like 60 films, and it was very heartening for me as a filmmaker to discover that most of the good ones are towards the end of his career.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't like he wasn't born a singular genius of filmmaking.
Right.
He actually had to do it.
Yes. And he's a great example. If you're a working artist and you want to take the preciousness out of your art, this guy just worked. That's what he did. He just worked. And I think Hitchcock is the kind of guy that too, like if the money wasn't there, he'd probably get it together. He'd find a way to do it. You just find a way to do it. It's a profession. It's a profession. And if he had been shut out of cinema, he probably would have done something else. He would have written, he would have, if you have that creative impulse in you, you just work, you just do it. And maybe you make Vertigo one day. And maybe 40 years later, everybody looks back and says, that's the greatest movie ever made. All right. So he was almost 21 and the film industry was not much older. Louis Daguerre's still photographic process was first publicly announced in 1839, and by 1872, there was already a stumbling progress toward the reproduction of motion in pictures. Edward Maybridge photographed the successive rapid movements of a trotting horse in a series of closely timed still shots. The illusion of motion was soon attempted in parlor game devices too, such as Emile Renaud's diverting praxinoscope. an arrangement of mirrors and hand-drawn or photographed figures that, when quickly manipulated, provided simple amusement. Thomas Edison, who was much more interested in perfecting his light bulb and phonograph than in catering to what he considered the middle-class taste of those hungry for motion pictures, well, that's a mouthful, turned over to his assistant William Kennedy Laurie Dixon the task of working on a kinetoscope. By 1891, Dixon had developed a crudely effective slot machine that projected a film loop for a solitary viewer. About the same time, George Eastman announced a perforated celluloid film, and this enabled Dixon and Edison to perfect their motion picture camera and to standardize the 35 millimeter film stock ratio. At this point, fewer than 60 years had passed since the first photographs astounded those who sat for them. Yet it was, can you imagine? It's like being like in the, like the 1840s, 1850s. You sit still for 5 minutes and then you're shown back to you. I'm like looking at our Zoom screen right now, just thinking how weird it is, and we just take it for it's very strange and uncanny.
Oh yeah. It would have tripped people out for sure.
Yeah. So I just want to get a little more here. And so now, okay, we're getting the history of motion pictures here, obviously, and I want that to be some background. We could go more into it, but in any case, this was the period during which Alfred Hitchcock was born, A Trip to the Moon, right? I say that, you immediately see it. It's iconic. And it was the most important for the nascent film industry. Between 1895 and 1905, political life was dominated in England by an extremely conservative government. The monarchy was prestigious, the state imperialistic, the sun never set on the realm, and Victoria's Diamond Jubilee was celebrated with great rejoicing in 1897. England was still a country with a sharp division between the rulers and the ruled. Shocking poverty still prevailed and was much more taken for granted than it is today. It was a land where, as J.B. Priestley observed, a third of the population living at the center of this huge empire were below any humane level of subsistence. They were overworked, underpaid, and crowded into slum property. Goes on. Gradually, however, the working classes experienced some improvement in their lives. This is so important, too, because cinema is the most populist entertainment. Cinema and pop music, that's it. I mean, it doesn't get more popular than cinema. Cinema flattens and equalizes what the theater does. For you're growing up on a farm somewhere. You're never going to go see the opera. You're never going to go see the theater. Cinema comes now. You can go and see. You can see Gone with the Wind. Just like the banker in New York. Yeah. And that's a complete revolution in values and media and everything. We take it for granted now, but it's not to be taken for granted. Okay, so a little more of the historical background here. Laborers were forming unions, there was better education, and working hours were shortened, which meant more leisure time. The rich began to transport themselves in automobiles. Hey, there you go, Detroit next week, Brad. Well, the poor could purchase bicycles more cheaply than ever. With the increase in literacy, public libraries multiplied, newspapers proliferated, and in 1896, the first halfpenny newspaper, the Daily Mail, was published. No. Hey, we love the Daily Mail. It made a story out of each news item. Nothing was so important as the reader's attention. Nothing changes. And if the technique of fiction were necessary to hold it, they were exploited at the drop of a printer's block. This was also the era of the spectator worker. To the sports matches, the music halls, and the theaters were soon added the movie parlors, and then the movie palaces of London. Like the assembly line when it developed the possibilities of mass production, the astounding growth of the modern mass media fed on people's need for diversion and novelty and their willingness to pay for it. Manufactured by showmen and marketed by showmen, the cinema was born at a time when the arts, like the benefits of science, were becoming available to the masses. Edison, Dixon, and Lumiere brothers had British counterparts in the rush for this burgeoning market. And that's what Hitchcock enters into. And I'm going to keep going a little bit more because I want to get this like old-timey and bring him into sort of adulthood. By 1910, when Hitchcock began to join the crowds at the music halls and vaudeville houses, a few British films taking their lead from The Great Train Robbery, the 12-minute landmark film directed by the American Edwin S. Porter in 1903, were as long as 10 minutes. Most, however, were shorter. And here's the kind of names from the 1908 matinee list. The Fatal Sneeze, The First Quarrel, Baby's Dream of Toyland, The Onion Fiend, Tommy and the Police Whistle, Harry Lauder in a Hurry. The entire program was screened in less than a half hour and was accompanied by a full orchestra.
Nice.
I love it.
I want to know more about this Onion Fiend. But
well, go and look up okay. The Onion Fiend short film, Brad, because I'm going to need a little break here in a minute. And I promise
we'll
be getting Abbie in here too. Abbie, her outline, her part of the outline really comes in when we start talking about the bigger pictures. I just, and Abbie, thanks for hanging out while I do this. At once, however, problems arose in England. The weather, the climate, the economy, and the curious Philistinism that held the cinema to be fundamentally a lowbrow diversion were factors hostile to the development of a successful film industry.
That sounds just like the like today.
I was just gonna say, yeah. You don't really have magic hour over there, do you? The light really doesn't. It really doesn't work.
No, it just kind of gloams.
The magic gloam. That's hilarious. By 1906, most films shown in Great Britain were made in America or on the continent. The native British industry was fading. Very quickly, American companies especially saw a fertile field in England for their operations, and famous Players Lasky Corporation, the parent company that controlled Paramount Pictures, opened the Islington studio in North London, where, by the way, we may be doing a play. We may be doing a play in Islington soon. Okay, stay tuned. That hired Alfred Hitchcock, so that's where he gets hired. And he ends up going to work for those studios, or for that studio. Okay. So he's preparing a portfolio. About the time Hitchcock was preparing a portfolio to present to various executives, these other executives, these ones from Lasky, Zucker and Lasky, visited Islington in 1920. They approved pre-production plans and budget for the first films the company would produce in England, and the trade papers reported that their first picture would be The Sorrows of Satan. Love it. Accordingly, Hitchcock read the novel on which the screenplay would be based and included in his portfolio a series of designs appropriate for that story. By the time he was being considered for the part-time job of title designer, however, a decision had been made to cancel The Sorrows of Satan and to proceed directly with Hugh Ford's film The Great Day, to be followed by The Call of Youth. Eager to please his prospective employers, Hitchcock prepared designs for these films almost overnight. This is great. This is a great example of hustle. How do you get in? You want to work in the industry? You just start doing stuff on spec. Hey, I heard you're doing The Sorrows of Satan. I've got title designs for that. Yeah, it's good. He was hired at once on a part-time basis, and he's still working over at Henley. So he's a hustler. In the next 2 years, he designed the title card drawings for and the lettering styles for all the famous Players Lasky films. That's crazy. So Hitchcock's career starts by doing title designs.
Right.
That's how he gets into the industry. I'm not some diva.
Yeah.
I'm just going to work in the business. I want to be in the business. I love that. The hours were long in Islington, and the shooting schedules were demanding. But Hitchcock, who was now putting on weight quickly and finding it harder to take off, was often the first to arrive in the morning and the last to depart at night. It's not luck. There's luck is, you know what I mean? You actually can grind your way into a career.
Well, here's luck is just preparation plus timing.
There you are. Luck is that's so true, Abbie. So true. Here's what Hitchcock said. I'm American trained. All of the personnel at the studio was American, he later recalled. And as soon as you entered the studio doors, you were in an American atmosphere. I started out as designer of titles, working with Mordaunt Hall, who was a critic later for the New York Times, and with Tom Garrity, who had been a writer for Douglas Fairbanks. If Hitchcock was not, as he always insisted he was not, ambitious to assume more responsibility, and if he did not hope to move along to positions of greater creative control as a director, then it is hard to understand the intense devotion to a very modest job and his insistence on learning everything there was to learn about film. When the studio executives or film directors ran into trouble with some part of a project, or if they required additional help in writing a scene or designing a costume or set, Hitchcock was always at the ready with bright suggestions and an alacrity to try his hand at a new assignment. Graham and his team were not dealing with an indifferent or disinterested talent. All right. And let's see here. Yeah, so there he is. He's in the industry. And it's in the industry that he meets his wife, or who would become his wife, Alma. So let's get to know Alma a little bit. Alma Lucy Reville, is that right? I'm going to say it like that. Was born. She becomes Alma Hitchcock. So that's easier for me to say. Was born one day after Alfred Hitchcock on August 14th, 1899.
Age gap.
Yeah. Oh,
sorry.
She was only one day younger than you, you son of a bitch. It's hilarious.
Which matters the day before she turns 18.
Right.
Or
Right.
Awkward. In St. Anne's, Nottingham, just a day after Hitchcock, as if fate had already begun intertwining their lives. She was the second daughter of Matthew Edward Reville, a mechanic, and Lucy Owen. When Alma was young, the family moved to London, where her father found work at Twickenham Film Studios, one of the earliest film production.
Yeah, right? Nepo baby.
Oh, jeez. You can't be a Nepo baby if you're literally inventing the industry that you work in.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Like my children will all be podcasters, and they are not going to be Nepo babies. Actually, a Nepo baby of a podcaster is somebody who never podcasts.
That's right.
I'm going to save them this fate worse than death. No, we love podcasting. We're doing old timey radio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it was through her father's connections that Alma entered the world of cinema at an incredibly young age. You know what? You're right, Abby. Nepo baby. Yeah. Nepo baby. Alma began her film career as a tea girl at the studio, running errands and performing menial tasks. I briefly did voiceover for 5 US back when that existed. I think that's gone now in the UK. And I was in London near Holborn, and I was shocked because I would write my own. So I would do continuity for TV. Mm-hmm. So in Britain, Brad, in England, I don't know if they still do this, Abby, but they have continuity announcers between programs. It's almost like a DJ who comes on throughout the evening to kind of announce what's next. So I got to write and record things like, and next, it's time for our favorite ponytailed martial arts dude, Steven Seagal, in Time for a Kill. And I get to do that. And I got paid.
I think on certain stations they still have that. Yeah.
Well, so that's good. So if things go south here in America, I always have a career back.
You got a backup plan. That's good.
Back in the gloaming. The gloaming, where of course I fit in really well. But I was shocked because I would record. So I would write I would write in these offices, and then I'd go over and record at the BBC studios, which was really cool. It was the best. It's the best voiceover gig I had. The only reason I stopped doing it is I had to come back to the US, but it was really, really a sweet gig.
Those studios in Hopen don't exist anymore.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
No. Well, in any case, this story has a punchline. In the middle of the day, during work, when I'm writing my little Steven Seagal ditties, they would bring a tea cart around.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
At work.
Nice.
I'm like, what are we doing here? It's tea time.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Okay.
It's
tea time.
It comes to you. Okay. Yeah, I don't know how I felt. I felt odd. In any case, that's the thing. So she was a tea girl. At the age of 16, she was promoted to the role of film cutter, which allowed her to assist directors in editing motion pictures. That's a big deal. In an era where women were seldom...
Well, I was just going to say that apparently in that time and in the beginning of when movies were made, a lot of the assistant editing, I don't know if they would have been necessarily the top line editor, was done by women, because it was considered to be a sort of like non-creative and more technical role. And so yeah, there were just rooms full of women cutting up films, all the different scenes and things that had been shot.
There's a long tradition of women editors in cinema.
Yeah, I mean, like I would say there are probably more men that are editors than women, but like a lot of big movie directors like Martin Scorsese and David Lynch have had female editors for a long time.
A woman saved Jaws and won best editing for that. I'm trying to remember her name.
Didn't Kubrick work with a woman editor, female editor on a number of movies too?
Probably,
yeah. Verna Fields saved Jaws. And she had her work cut out for her on that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we'll always shout out Verna whenever comes along. In any case, she quickly became invaluable. She would work closely with directors on editing and shaping their films. She later described the art of editing as the art indeed, with a capital A.
I agree.
It is. There's a reason. Yeah. People, it's one of the most unsung elements of filmmaking is editing. And Abbie, of course, did some wonderful video designs for My Play Moderation that we did. And Abbie, this is one of your areas of expertise.
Yeah, I've been an editor for about 15 years, a director as well. But yeah, I've edited documentary and narrative and commercials and things. And it's definitely one of the, I would say, top 3 most important things in filmmaking.
Absolutely. Because what do you get? You get raw footage. You just get footage.
Yeah. And it's the third writing of the film.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there are stories of films changing dramatically, no pun intended.
Massively. You can completely change the structure of the film so that it's unrecognizable from the script in the edit.
Yeah, fascinating. So that's what she would become. She would become an editor, and then she would work with Hitchcock in that capacity. Her role in editing, screenwriting, and general production oversight meant that she had access to almost all aspects of film creation, a rare position for a woman at the time. Her early career flourished as she worked at famous Players Lasky, which we know is a subsidiary of Paramount, or was like the parent company, where she met a young Alfred Hitchcock, where he was also finding his feet in the film industry, initially working as a graphic designer before transitioning to art direction and script writing. I've got a little bit more about what Hitch is doing in London at the time, and it's got a little bit of a theater tie-in, so I want to include this. From 1920 to 1925, Hitchcock saw most of the major plays performed in London, and there were echoes of many of them in his film years later. In 1920, he saw Fay Compton, who would later appear in his Waltzes from Vienna, in the title role of James M. Barrie's Mary Rose, a fragile and delicate fantasy with an unsettling, bittersweet tone, which would later be revived. And it just goes on, and it talks about all of the things that he's seeing. And I'm going to read a few more because I like this idea of like I just like these old titles and everything. If I was going to do one PhD, like one idea that I have, I would love to do something, not that I ever will, but I would love to do something on the transition from theater to film and theater's relationship with cinema. To me, they're siblings, right? Or film is almost like a child of theater. You know, they're so closely related. And I think that early history is just so fascinating. So in any case, so here's what he's seeing. There were also The Beggar's Opera, Gladys Cooper, later to appear in Hitchcock's Rebecca. So he's seeing the actors that he's going to cast, right? He's going out and he's seeing these actors. In The Second Mrs. Tanqueray, Edmund Gwend, who would play in 4 Hitchcock films in Old Bill, MP, Conrad's dramatization, friend of the pod, of his own novel, The Secret Agent, a theatrical event that apparently made so strong an impression on Hitchcock that he persuaded Belkin to let him film it in 1936 as Sabotage. Did we cover that in the Conrad, that it was adapted?
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there you go. Merton of the Movies with Patricia Collins, who would later play the mother named Emma in Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt. And The Lady from the Sea with Brian Ahern, later to appear in I Confess. Okay, you get the idea. So he's going and he's seeing every movie or every play, and then he's picking up these actors from the, and then now I want to introduce Alma and get her on the scene because she plays such an important role in his life, despite his wandering eye, shall we say?
and I just looked up a picture of her, and she appears to be a brunette.
Oh dear.
Uh-oh.
Oh my. All right.